My mother, who had been battling cancer, sadly passed away after a long struggle. However, strangely enough, in the midst of my grief, my husband and mother-in-law were ecstatic. When I returned home after finishing the care of my father, the two of them greeted me with shining eyes. The inheritance is $2 million, right? Let's live in an apartment in New York City. And it's a brand new apartment too. These two, who only saw human life in terms of money, had made a huge misunderstanding. As a result, they ended up losing everything. My name is Erin. I'm a 43-year-old woman without children. This story is about when my mother passed away. My ex-husband, Tony, and my mother-in-law only saw human life in terms of money. I can't believe I didn't realize their true nature. I met Tony when I was 26, through a friend. He pursued me intensely, and although I wasn't very interested in him, it seemed he had fallen for me at first sight. Encouraged by my friend, I started dating him. Tony was tall and fairly handsome. However, he was not very understanding and was oblivious to others' feelings. He was also naive and a bit clueless, which I found cute back then, as I hadn't been very successful in relationships. What? The Olympics are going to be held in Paris? Did you know that? No, it's been a topic for over a year now. How did you not know? Somehow, these conversations felt fresh, and I enjoyed my time with him. After about a year of dating, he proposed. I was so happy to be proposed to, as I hadn't been very popular before, and I immediately said yes. However, once we got married, Tony didn't do any household chores. We started living together after getting married. Tony chose the apartment, which was close to both of our workplaces. But once we started our married life, Tony couldn't even do basic chores like laundry or cleaning. I was dissatisfied, but since I had always done household work from a young age, I could tolerate it. About 4 years into our marriage, my mother was diagnosed with cancer and had to be hospitalized. It was tough to see her getting weaker, but she always acted energetically, not wanting to worry us. I have to live to see my grandchildren. About having kids, sorry, it might take a bit longer. Watching my mother try so hard to live gave me courage. After a while, my father also needed care due to a leg injury. My father, a retired lawyer, had a gentle and generous personality, unlike the strict image most people have of lawyers. I'm really sorry, please take care of your mother too. I took care of my father, using day services, but mostly doing it myself. This meant I was often away from home. Tony, who couldn't do household chores, initially tolerated my absence, but eventually started to complain. Hey, when are you coming back? What about the housework? Sorry, could you please try to do the housework? My mother is really struggling right now, so I can't come home for a while. That's tough. Both your parents, huh? Alright, come back soon. I wasn't always at my parents' house, I occasionally returned to my own home. If I didn't, the house would become a mess because Tony didn't clean or take out the trash. One day when I returned home, I found my mother-in-law there. Tony was out at work. Oh, you're finally back. Are you done with your family matters? No, not yet. But why are you here, Mother? Why am I here? Because you've been neglecting your housework and going back to your parents' house. I've had to come here and do it. Neglecting. Ever since I can remember, my mother-in-law has always been overly indulgent with Tony. He is the youngest of 3 siblings. I always thought Tony's sloppiness was due to being spoiled by his 2 older sisters and mother-in-law. And she even called him by a nickname, which always made me feel a bit uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I had arranged for my father's care at a day service today, so I came back home for a bit. I'll do the housework. No need, I've almost finished the housework. You just prepare the meal. Understood. Have you thought about putting your father in a nursing home? You can't be away from your house forever, can you? Yes, you're right, sorry. My father's wish is to stay at home as long as he is still quite healthy. And as long as my mother is alive. So you're staying at your parents' house because of that? I don't think it's good to always pamper your children. Pampering children, coming from a parent who does just that? I remember thinking that. So? How is your mother? It's cancer, right? Yes, my mother's cancer is progressing day by day. Actually, the doctor at the hospital had just told me that my mother had at most 3 months left. I was so sad when I heard it, I almost cried, but the doctor encouraged me. Your mother has been doing remarkably well. Despite probably being in a lot of pain, she hardly ever shows it. As other staff have also said, your mother is a truly admirable person. I couldn't help but cry when he said that. As I struggled to respond to my mother-in-law's question about cancer, she kept asking without any sign of empathy. Oh dear, that's terrible. Is the cancer quite advanced? Yes. The doctor said she has about 3 months left. Oh, really? For some reason, she seemed almost happy at that moment. Afterward, she seemed to move about with a lighter step while doing the housework. As time passed, about 3 months since the doctor announced my mother's remaining time, my mother was still fighting the cancer and staying strong. She loved the garden at the hospital. My mother, who always loved flowers, made it a routine to enjoy the variety of flowers blooming in the garden. Whenever I visited, she would always ask me to take her to the garden. Mom, are you okay? You shouldn't overdo it. I'm perfectly fine. Your father needs me, and I can't just die easily. Besides, the flowers in the garden are blooming so beautifully now, aren't they? Seeing them gives me energy. Will you take me there? The mom, okay, let's go to the garden. The hospital staff were also amazed at how lively my mother was. Her spirited fight seemed to give other patients hope and courage as well. As I pushed my mother's wheelchair around the hospital, many patients greeted her. She had become quite well known. The dissatisfaction from Tony and my mother-in-law towards me grew over time. Tony would call me almost every day. Hey, when are you coming back? My mom is at her limit, you know? I understand how you feel, but how about you do some housework too? It's too much for your mother alone. Shut up. I'm tired from work. I don't have the energy to do housework. It's your fault for not coming home. I'm the one supporting our household. So it's natural for you to do the housework. I understand, but please think about my parents too. I can't do it all alone. If you're going to say that, then think about my mother too. This is how it has always been with Tony. He always seems to miss the point. Why doesn't he do the housework that his mother is doing? Why does he equate his healthy mother-in-law with my sick parents? Sigh. Okay, I get it. I'll come home more often. What's with the sigh? What are you dissatisfied with? Tell me. And this is how it turns into a fight. He thinks raising his voice and getting angry solves everything. Tony can't have a calm conversation. But, you can do the basic housework, right? Like laundry and cleaning. I did it while working too, didn't I? How am I supposed to know how to do it? No one ever taught me. I can't do it if I'm not taught. I was so astounded by his logic that I didn't know what to say. After listening to Tony's nonsensical arguments over the phone, I thought the call was finally over, but about 20 minutes later, I got a call from my mother-in-law. A wife who can't even take care of her husband is useless. Actually, an old fogey who can't even move properly should just die quickly instead of struggling to live. I had somewhat expected this when the call from Tony ended. But it was still an outrageous thing to hear. I hung up the phone without saying anything back. Around this time, I started considering divorcing Tony. Living apart from him made me realize how abnormal his behavior was. Honestly, it was mentally easier to live with my father than to live in the same house as Tony. I picked up the voice recorder I had prepared. An old fogey who can't even move properly should just die quickly instead of struggling to live. I had recorded my mother-in-law's abusive words. I started collecting their verbal abuse as evidence. Then, about a year after the day my mother was given her prognosis, I received a call from the hospital. Your mother is in a critical condition. We think today or tomorrow will be crucial. I immediately went to the hospital with my father. My mother looked like she was sleeping peacefully, but her pulse was barely there. My father spoke to her in a gentle voice. Mother, we really had a great time together, didn't we? I'm so glad I met you. Let's be together again in the next life. I was holding my mother's hand and crying. I couldn't find the words to say. She had been fine until yesterday. My mother seemed to relax a bit at my father's words, and she peacefully fell asleep. After a long battle with cancer, my mother passed away. The day my mother died, the entire hospital was enveloped in tears. She had always tried to stay cheerful so as not to worry us. I was fooled into thinking she would live longer, but it seemed she had reached her limit. Many doctors and patients mourned my mother. She really fought hard. The flowers in the garden must be missing her too. Many doctors and patients spoke to my father and me. Knowing how much my mother was loved was as gratifying to me as if it were about myself. After the wake and funeral, my father, who had been living in the family home, began the process of moving into a nursing home soon after my mother's death. Dad, are you sure about this? I didn't want to leave this place while your mother was alive. I wanted to make sure her home was here for her to return to. Dad. I think my father's kindness was one of the reasons my mother lived so long. Despite his bad leg, he often visited her and was a great conversation partner for her. Dad, I'm sorry, from now on we won't be able to spend as much time together. No, I'm really sorry for the burden I've caused you until now. From now on, take care of your own family. I'm really glad you're my daughter. That day, my father stayed at the nursing home for the night. The family home, now empty, temporarily became a vacant house. It had been a long time since I had to return to the home where Tony was waiting. After enduring his snide remarks over the phone, my steps felt incredibly heavy. I planned to settle down a bit after returning home and then bring up the topic of divorce. Upon my arrival, Tony and his mother greeted me with inexplicably sparkling eyes. I'm home. Sorry for leaving the house empty for so long. Welcome back, Aaron. It's okay. I took care of all the housework. You must feel relieved now. Well done. It's been tough while Aaron was away. But finally, we can relax. Both of them were unusually cheerful. I was expecting immediate sarcasm upon my return, so their mood was somewhat eerie. The reason for this soon became clear. So? About your mother's inheritance, it's there, right? Inheritance? We haven't discussed that yet. Not yet? Well, never mind. That's right. Aaron, I have a surprise for you. A surprise? What is it? Inheritance? A surprise? Frankly, I had a bad feeling about this. As always, Tony was clueless about the ways of the world. My mother-in-law stood beside him, smiling and staring at me. It was so eerie that I got goosebumps. I bought an apartment in the city. Let's all live there together. Isn't that great? And it's a brand new apartment too. Exciting, isn't it? My mind went blank. An apartment? Why an apartment? And the three of us? An apartment? Can you explain what you mean? It's an apartment. Your mother's inheritance, it's $2 million, right? That's right, Aaron. No need to play it cool, just be happy. My mother's inheritance isn't $2 million. Besides, most of what she had was spent on her medical treatment. No, Aaron, your mother-in-law had an inheritance of $2 million. Maybe you're thinking of my father? What? When I said this, the two of them stood there, mouths agape. My father did have assets inherited over generations and money earned as a lawyer. I didn't know the exact amount. But Tony seemed to have mistaken my father's assets for my mother's. Wait a minute, Aaron. That's not what we heard. Tony, did you misunderstand again? Wait, Aaron, the inheritance? The $2 million inheritance? Why isn't it there? What are you talking about? My father is still alive, so there shouldn't be any inheritance yet. Are you sure it's not your mother's inheritance? Are you mistaken? I just told you, my mother just passed away, so I don't know everything. But she definitely didn't have her own inheritance. I've heard about the assets my father inherited. But talking about inheritance right after my mother's death, what kind of person are you? Do you only see human life as money? As I said this, Tony appeared to ponder for a moment. Then he muttered to himself. So, the one who died didn't leave any inheritance. I didn't miss what he said. Tony only saw my mother as a source of inheritance. You're the worst. Then, my mother-in-law turned on me. You're the worst, Aaron. You deceived Tony, didn't you? You took advantage of his naivety. She seemed to realize the hopelessness of their mistake and appeared to be panicking. What benefit would I have from deceiving you? And how much did you spend on this apartment? $600,000. Tony was deep in thought by himself. Apparently, he had genuinely misunderstood and, along with his mother, had been planning how to use the supposed inheritance, and a part was for the apartment. Enough. First of all, even thinking about using my parents' inheritance without consent is despicable. Including the harassment I endured while staying at my parents' house. I can't stay with you two anymore. I've decided to get a divorce. I brought up the divorce sooner than I had planned. Pushed over the edge by the apartment issue. Wait a minute, Aaron. Isn't that a bit much to say? Right? You didn't care about my mother's death, did you? You were just happy thinking you'd get an inheritance. First of all, you don't have any right to the inheritance, do you? You didn't even know that, and you went ahead and signed a contract for an apartment. I can't live with you. I don't have a right to the inheritance? That can't be. Aaron's money is supposed to be our money as a couple, right? Our money? You were going to use it as your own money. Enough. Goodbye. Hey. Wait a minute. I shook off Tony's attempts to stop me and left the house. I had nowhere to go, but I decided to spend the night alone in the now empty family home. The next morning, my smartphone was full of missed calls, all of which I ignored. I thought my feelings would calm down after a night, even though I had said such things impulsively. But my desire for a divorce didn't subside. I consulted with my father, a former lawyer, and he introduced me to a competent attorney. The divorce mediation was overwhelmingly in my favor, thanks to the voice recorder I had prepared. A wife who can't even take care of her husband is really useless. Or rather, an old fogey who can't even move properly should just die quickly instead of living miserably. So, the one who died didn't have any inheritance. The words my mother-in-law once spat out over the phone. And Tony's muttered true feelings were all recorded on the voice recorder. The mediation itself was over in about 3 months. Thanks to the lawyer my father introduced, it was resolved a bit faster than average. Tony continued to contact me persistently even after the divorce was finalized. He called and emailed, mostly about the apartment. It was clear that he never really cared about me. Tony's dream was to live comfortably in the apartment bought with the inheritance, making me do all the housework. Eventually, I started ignoring all his messages. Later, I started living with my father at my request. To think, your husband thought he could inherit my assets. Did your mother-in-law really not know anything? He thought it would become both of our money since it was to be inherited by me. But how did he even come to believe my mother had an inheritance of $2 million? That's because I accidentally let slip when I drank with him before you got married. I said I had assets worth $2 million. I wanted him to be a man who could earn well too. What? Dad, it was you. Maybe I didn't say it after all. I don't remember much since I was drinking. What's that about? My father has always been a joker. But for Tony to remember and misunderstand such a conversation from a drinking session. As for Tony, he ended up canceling the apartment contract, but had to pay nearly $100,000 in down payments and penalties. Tony didn't have any savings, so he must be begging his mother for help now. It's a natural consequence for someone like Tony, who only saw human life in terms of money. It was also wrong to make expensive purchases without consulting me. Getting married might have been a mistake, but I'm glad I got divorced before my father was gone.